we can do things so much more cheaply than we could in the past, and we can experiment and try new things out. This is what GCpedia looks like. It's already being used by some people in the clerk. Some of the provinces, which is a level jurisdiction below the federal government in Canada, also are using the same software internally. Another exciting development many of you have probably heard about is open data. So I advised the mayor in Vancouver. I helped write something called the Open Motion, where we talked about getting open data, doing open source software, and using open standards. It helped create this, which is our open data portal. So what you're looking at are data sets, and then what formats they're available, and anybody, be they from Vancouver, from Canada, from Portugal, can come to data.vancouver.ca, and they can download these data sets, and they can do whatever they want with them. And what do they do with them? Well, here's my favorite example so far. And I love it, not because it's complicated and not because it's sophisticated, but because, and not even because it's simple. I love it because citizens care about it. So what you're looking at is the garbage collection zones in the city of Vancouver. There are 8 different zones, two have the same color. And the complicated thing about garbage collection in Vancouver is every single month, the date that your garbage gets picked up changes. And all the city would do was give you a little calendar and say, okay, put this on your refrigerator and I hope you remember. And what these guys did is they put in Google Maps the garbage zones, and if you go and click on the zone in which you live, it gives you the calendar. And the nice thing about it is you can then download that calendar into your BlackBerry or into your iPhone, and so it will remind you. Or if you want, you can register and they'll send you an email the day before your garbage day at the hour of your choosing. We've never talked about this program publicly. There are maybe 150,000 households in Vancouver. Just through word of mouth over the last couple of months, already 3,000 households are using it, and that number just continues to grow. And the Vancouver government had nothing to do with this. All they did was put the data out there. We're also starting to see new businesses arise. I'm really interested in this business, which is coming out of Vancouver. One of the data sets Vancouver shared was parking spots. And so someone found all of the disabled parking spots, so for parking spots for people who are using wheelchairs or the elderly, and they mapped those in Google Map. But then they went further than that. Since many of the disabled parking spots are on private land, they're owned by businesses that are told they have to have a number of parking spots for disabled people. Now, if you're a disabled person, on your iPhone, if you see a disabled parking spot, you can mark it on the map, and then everybody else who uses that application can also see there's a parking spot for people like you there. But the really clever part is they're talking to city governments now, and if someone is illegally parked in a disabled parking spot, you can take your iPhone and you can take a picture of the car with the license plate number and an email straight to the city, and the city can then remotely send that person a ticket for illegally parking in a disabled person's parking spot. Since we already know that something like 30% of the time the person parked in a disabled parking spot is not actually disabled. Other type of interesting things that have come up, video game companies have taken interest in the Open Data Initiative. So Microsoft sponsored a team which created something called Taxi City. And what you're looking at is in the lower corner there, that's Bing Maps, which is Microsoft's mapping platform online. And that's a taxi that you can actually control and drive. And it's using data from the city of Vancouver to tell you where those blue outlines are buildings and where the roads are. So you're actually driving in live data and you're using a live map to pilot you. It's not particularly sophisticated, but it's pushing the technology to its very edge. And what it suggests is in the future, forget about just looking inside Google Maps or Bing Maps, you could actually drive around. And that's what these guys are trying to do. And the other interesting thing about it is, normally when you're creating a video game, you're trying to create a city. It takes a ton of time to actually lay the city out, huge number of programmers. The guys at this school where I do some teaching discovered, wow, we can actually just take the open data, all the outline data of the city of Vancouver, randomize the heights of the building, and boom, we have a city. And what used to take hundreds and hundreds of coders, hours and hours to do, they're now able to do in the moment of minutes. So collapsing the cost of creating video games. Another interesting story, here's a developer in Vancouver who got very concerned about some new development proposals, and so he mapped the downtown core in 3D so that you could see how a building will look and how it will affect the views. So what you're looking at here is actual data that's pulled from the data portal. He's now created it in 3D, and he can plant you anywhere on any street, on any balcony, on any building, and you can see what a new building will look like. So now all of a sudden citizens have as much data and tools that are as powerful as the city has had and as developers have had. And it's completely transforming how they can have debates with those in power who are making decisions about the communities in which they live. What all of this really means is we're shifting where the value lies around how government communicates with people. Right now, all of the value lies in who owns the data. Because if you own the data, you control access, you control information. But when you make the data free, there's no value in the data anymore. The value is in explaining the data. So every application you're looking at right here is all about how do we make the government better understood by the citizens. People are competing to tell your story to your citizens. And so this is a great example of this as well, where these guys in the United Kingdom are taking the entire UK budget and visualizing it so that the citizens of the United Kingdom can better understand how money is being spent, because nobody can look at an Excel spreadsheet and go, oh yeah, I get this. But if you show them a whole series of bubbles that are kind of different sizes, they go, oh, defense gets that much and social housing gets that much, they begin to understand very differently. The competition now is around displaying the data. Finally, I want to close out with, I think, some examples where people are really challenging government in some interesting ways. So in Canada, we have something called the Do Not Call Registry, which is, I don't know if you have this in Portugal, but we have a terrible phenomenon of people who call you during dinner because they want to sell you something. Often, you don't know who these people are. You didn't really ask for them to call you to begin with. We call them telemarketers. So the Canadian government, recognizing that people didn't like this, created something called a Do Not Call Registry. And if you put your phone number on the registry, basically said, no telemarketer is allowed to call you. Here's the problem with the registry. Canada has something called the Access to Information Act, which means if I want to know what government's doing, I can write and I can say, I'd like to see these documents. All of the phone numbers in the registry can be accessed through an Access to Information request. So if you are a telemarketer and you don't live in Canada and you don't care about Canadian laws, the best thing you could do to get a whole bunch of phone numbers of people who definitely exist and who have names is to ask for the list of phone numbers from the Canadian government, who are then obliged to give it to you. So a professor at the University of Ottawa by the name of Michael Geist, who's a fantastic man, created his own site called I Opt Out, which allows you to go in and you can choose to opt out from all calls, or you can just choose to opt out from certain industries. And what he's done is he doesn't collect your number, he just collects it for an instance, and he's found all of the websites of these companies, the processes you have to go to opt out of getting any marketing material from them, and he automatically just sends on your numbers to them and gets you opted out. But he allows you to customize it, so he's taken it to a whole new level. And what's fascinating, this is the number of Canadian phone numbers that have so far registered with Michael Geist's site. There are only 32 million Canadians. It's a pretty incredible number. Another great example of where I think people are beginning to think about how we can tap into the knowledge of people, the Australian government, their library, wanted to digitize all of their archive newspapers. And so what you have here is you have all these newspapers that are kind of in old visual formats, and you can see at the top there's a spelling mistake. There is no English word for pilfering, spelled P-I-L-F-E-R-I-N-G. And so what they've done instead is they said whenever you see a mistake, over on the left-hand side, you can actually make a correction. And it will rescan it and fix the mistake. And they've had literally millions and millions and millions of people fix the mistakes. And most interestingly, 20% of the edits have come from outside of Australia. So here's a great example of a government overwhelmed by data that it knows is bad. And most governments say, well, if the data is bad, we can't share it with the public. And doing the exact opposite, saying we know the data is bad, so let's share it so the public can help us fix it. Another great example here, we have the Extraordinaries, an application for the iPhone, where the Library of Congress in the United States has so many photos, it doesn't even know what they all are of. So it just started digitizing the photos, and this is on your iPhone. If you have a couple spare moments on the bus, you just open up this application, you take a look, and it asks you to tag about the photo. So if there's a guy in the photo, you say man. If there's a, if there's a picture of the wilderness, you say park and wilderness. And what they're getting is they're getting all of this metadata about this huge catalog of photos, which before they knew nothing about. And people are doing this while riding the subway. They have a couple of spare seconds here, they have a couple of spare seconds there, and they're contributing their time. So what I'm seeing is increasingly the governments that put data out there are the governments that are going to get the most engaged citizens. They're going to get the citizens who want to help the most, who want to learn the most about government, but also want to explain government to their fellow citizens and want to build applications that actually do what we do, but do it better or serve niche communities. Right now, I think there's this big gap between the government and the private sector and the nonprofit sector in how we serve individuals and how we understand them. And that gap cannot last. I think there's a terrible outcome where people lose faith in government, which is a very real possibility. But I think there's a wonderful opportunity using social media and technology. The other piece is I think very small adjustments can yield powerful results. So even just doing one or two small things can completely shift how you understand success. And third is, this stuff has already begun. You are doing it in small pockets. People out there are doing it, so you got to find who's already doing it and who's doing successfully, and just figure out what they're doing and pile on and learn from those lessons and do it more effectively yourself. My name is David Eaves. I've probably talked for far too long already. I'm already heard a ton of really interesting things that have gone on. Most specifically, and I'm going to already get it wrong because I'm looking at which is the SpeedX. Is that what it's called? SpeedX? The SpeedX program. Sorry, what's it? Simplex. Thank you. Sorry, the Simplex program in the government. And what I loved about Simplex is open data is about asking citizens how they can make government better by doing it on their own. And Simplex is just doing that within government. And so you guys have already understood the principles around how Government 2.0 works. And what I'd love to hear, I can't wait to hear more about Simplex examples, but what I want you to be thinking about too is how do we get more information in machine-readable formats out to the public, get our government more open so that they can start contributing as well. So thank you so much. I can't wait for questions.